Hi, I'm Alana. Welcome to another video. In today's video, we're doing a get ready with me for church. So, today I have two book recommendations to begin with. So, the first one, I actually recommended it last week, but I had only started reading it. So, this one is called The Degenerates by Braden Richardson. So it's about like all these different people, and their stories are all interwoven. Like some of them are set in India, and then some of them are set in Australia, and then some of them are set in the United States. But it's like the same stories from different perspectives, and they're all like degenerates, like they're people who are involved in drugs or crime or prostitution. And yeah, so their stories are all like interwoven. And so it's kind of the same story from different angles, and it's about like how these different people like affect each other's lives. And yeah, it's actually a really good book. I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm almost finished it now. But yeah, The Degenerates by Braden Richardson. And then the second book that I want to recommend this week is called Identity by Milan Kundera. So Milan Kundera is a French and Czech author, and he's one of my favorite writers. He's dead now, but all of his books are about different matters of the heart. So like this one is called Identity. So it's about identity. He has other books called Ignorance. Ignorance is my favorite Milan Kundera book, and then another one called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. But this one is about, so there's a couple, keep in mind they're French, so it's set in Paris, and the names are Chantal and Jean-Jacques. And so they've been together for a while, and then one day Chantal's upset and she comes to Jean-Jacques and she's crying, and he's like, "Why are you upset?" And she says, "Men don't turn to look at me anymore." And he's like, "That's why you're upset?" And she says it again, like, "Men don't turn to look at me anymore." And so Jean-Jacques starts writing her secret letters, like he starts writing her letters from a secret admirer to try and like boost her self-esteem. So he starts writing her letters saying like, "Oh, I've been watching you and you're very beautiful," and like, but it's him, but he pretends to be a secret admirer to like boost her confidence and make her feel like men still turn to look at her. And so he starts writing her these letters, but then she doesn't like mention the letters to him. Instead, she starts keeping the letters and she doesn't mention them to Jean-Jacques. And then he's like, "Wait, so now she's keeping these letters from this secret admirer. Like, can I trust her?" Even though it's Jean-Jacques who's writing the letters. And so it all gets a bit like confusing. But yeah, I love all of Milan Kundera's books. He's such a talented writer, and his books are all really like deep and profound and beautiful and so French and so poetic. So Milan Kundera, Identity. I would also recommend you read Ignorance and The Unbearable Lightness of Being. So what else? Oh, I watched Mark Lader's first feature-length film, documentary film, Fig, and it's really good. It's narrated by a man called Sharp. So Sharp is a gentleman who Mark has interviewed on a number of occasions. I actually first listened to an interview with Sharp earlier in January, so like last month. I listened about like the beginning of last month. I think on the 1st of January was the first time that I listened to an interview with Sharp. And at first, I hated him. So Sharp is a pimp. He works as a pimp, and he has for basically his whole life. And he has received awards for his pimping from like, at like the Players Ball. If you don't know what that is, the Players Ball is some like event for pimps where they award like the Pimp of the Year and like best pimps. So Sharp has previously won the Pimp of the Year award at the Players Ball. So yeah, he has the deepest voice, like the deepest voice you will ever hear. And he's a very colourful character. So the first time I listened to an interview with him, I hated him. And now I have warmed to him somewhat, but I can listen to his interviews, but I don't think that he is a person who anyone should be taking seriously. And I also think that he has a lot of deep-seated rage, and he says that he loves women, but I don't think that he sounds very much like he loves women. Like he talks about, in the last interview I listened to with him, he was talking about how beating a woman is like sometimes appropriate. And yeah, he's very aggressive. I think that would be a word that would fit him. He's very aggressive, and he's very sure of himself. He has a huge ego, and a very deep voice. So he's quite colourful. He's quite a colourful character. But yeah, so I listened to a couple of interviews with him, and he actually does the narrating in Mark Lader's new documentary film, Fig. And I mean, he's entertaining. He is definitely entertaining, but I also don't think that he's someone who anyone should be taking seriously. But he did have a role on a very successful podcast called No Jumper, until I think maybe he was fired from that recently. So yeah, I mean, like, he sounds like he might be fun to hang out with maybe, but he doesn't sound like he likes women, and he sounds like he has a huge ego and a lot of like repressed rage and hatred. But anyway, who else have I been listening to? Okay, so my favourite interview on Soft White Underbelly that I have listened to this week was with a man who was a war veteran, and his name was Repeat. And so I'd actually come across his interview a number of times, like while I was scrolling through White Underbelly looking for an episode to listen to. I actually have scrolled past his interview a number of times because it said repeat, so I thought that it just meant that like it was a repeat of an old episode. So I didn't get around to listening to it until just the other night, but it's actually, his name is Repeat, and he is a war veteran. And let me tell you, this interview was so entertaining. He's so funny. He's he's a war veteran. I mean, now I think he's homeless and he lives on Skid Row, but he has the best stories. So he talks about how like he went to prison and how he survived in prison. He said that when he was in prison, there was this man who was like trying to grape him, and he was like, nah, I ain't having none of this. And so the guy's like, hey, Repeat, I'm gonna F you tonight. And then Repeat was like, all right, we're on. And then he saw the man later that day, and he was like, yo, you're meant to be effing me tonight. And then he was like, oh yeah. And so they went in the cell together, and this man like took a swing at him, and they started fighting. And Repeat has this incredible stamina, so he can just fight for like ages. Like he can fight for like an hour. And he was fighting this man who was trying to grape him, and he took a bite out of him. And the man like screamed, and yeah, so he started like biting him, and then Repeat was like, I'm gonna eat this mother effer. And if you want to just skip to the part where he says, I'm gonna eat this mother effer, it's at 23 minutes and 45 seconds. And yeah, that was one of the funniest interviews I have listened to on Soft White Underbelly. Oh yeah, then last night I was listening to an interview with a man who, he lives in Hawaii. He's from Hawaii, from Maui, And he said that when he was younger, he had a stepfather who would abuse he and his sister, and his stepfather was on drugs, and he would often be left alone, he and his little sister would often be left alone with his stepfather. And then one day his stepfather was smoking drugs in the house and they were babysitting he and his little sister, and he was 3 and his little sister was 1 year old, and she was crying, and his stepdad just picked her up and started bashing her head against the wall until she stopped making noise, and then she died, obviously. And then that man, the stepdad, only ended up spending 7 years in prison for that, so now he's out. And then that same man, when he was 14 years old, he got stabbed in the face. He got stabbed in the face by someone who was in a rival gang to his dad, who was looking for his dad, and he couldn't find him, so he stabbed his son. And this guy was only 14 when he was stabbed in the face, and during the surgery, they had to remove one of his eyeballs, so now he only has one eyeball. And then he said that his dad ended up killing that man in prison eventually. So that man was actually really incredible. He was so strong, and he wasn't he didn't blame anyone else for what happened to him. He was now addicted to fentanyl though, which is understandable. But yeah, that was a particularly touching interview. So thank you for getting ready with me for church today. You're beautiful, you're perfect, I love you, God bless you. If you're new, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel.